Salutations, Legion of Doom. Welcome to podcast, a storm where social awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all around nerds convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my host, the nerdy occultist, aka the authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Hello, everyone. And yes, I am feeling better. For the past week and a half, give or take, it's been a pain in the ass for me to even talk, let alone breathe. But I'm just now beginning to feel better, so hurrah. Like, as I woke up today, I was finally feeling better. So, yay for timing. Anyway, on to the issue du jour, namely the second coming of Gamergate and the stupidity of our enemies once more.
Right, so we're going to cover the two articles we did have originally planned to do last week, but because of timing, we weren't able to. So.
Mm-hmm. And the new one.
Two new ones.
Oh, right. Okay. So once more into the headline story of the week.
All right. So this is originally from Kotaku.com. Sweet Baby Inc. doesn't do what some gamers think it does. No, as written by Alyssa Mercant, and published Wednesday. It would be 2 weeks ago, so that would be I
believe that would be the 11th, but don't quote me.
It's 24th, so
minus 14 because 2 weeks. So
the 10th?
I think, yeah. Okay, because
March.
I remember
10th.
a couple weeks ago I had a doctor's appointment, and I believe it was on the 11th. But anyway, moving right along.
Okay. Yeah. Subheader is. Let me start over again then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Kotaku.com Inc. can do what some gamers thinks it does. Written by Alyssa Mercant. If I say the name wrong, I'm sorry. And this was published, guessing at least, March 10th, 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Subheader is no one company isn't forcing diversity into all your video games.
No, but it is definitely one of the companies doing so. It's not as you are technically correct, the best kind of correct, to quote the Futurama meme, in that it's not just one company doing it all, but the twin specters of DEI and ESG and the academic structure known broadly as quote-unquote social justice or neo-Hegelian critical theory, depending on how specific you want to get about it, is responsible for the phenomena we now refer to as wokeness, we used to refer to as social justice. I prefer still calling it social justice because it's actually more descriptive and less explicitly derogatory, i.e., it actually relates to what we are taking issue with as opposed to just a stick with which to whack things. And generally, I find terms that are descriptive better than terms that are just derogatory. So I still call it social justice. I never felt the need to upgrade it to woke. The only time I deal with woke is when other people use the term, and then I use it to make it easier to communicate with people. But I prefer still calling it social justice because it's actually descriptive of the phenomena we're trying to oppose here. Anyway, moving on.
All right. Sweet Sweet Baby Inc. is not the largest narrative design company in the games industry, nor is it solely responsible for the characters and stories in recent high-profile releases like 22, God of War Ragnarok, and Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. But good luck telling some gamers that.
Because even though they aren't the largest or the most prolific, they are the one that most recently has come to the fore. And just because they're not the largest constituents of people doing it, or they're not responsible for every single instance of social justice worming its way into narratives, doesn't mean they don't do it. It just means they're not the largest or most prolific people doing it. But they do definitely do it by their own admission. Hence why this article is being framed rather disingenuously. Moving on.
Late last month, one of the company's consultants discovered a Steam group dedicated to detecting games that Sweet Baby Inc. has worked on. The purpose, to encourage people to avoid those games because the group had deemed SB as pushing a agenda by working toward greater diversity. The Steam group now has more than 100,000 followers, and Discord boasts nearly 2,000 members. But its
Okay.
ire against Sweet Baby Inc. Hold on, I just want to finish the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
But this ire against Sweet Baby Inc. and DEI initiatives in general isn't new. An October 2023 Kiwi Farms post shares similar sentiments, stating that the company's involvement in Remedy's winning 2023 action game Alan Wake was possibly one of the biggest scandals in gaming history. I can't really say anything to that last part because I didn't hear a damn thing about it until just now.
Okay, here's the thing. The implication of the Steam group is immaterial to the point. Because if you were a fan of Sweet Baby Inc., you could have used the group Sweet Baby Detected to go out and purchase all of Sweet Baby Inc.'s merchandise. The thing is, there's nothing explicitly negative on the Steam list. It's just a list of games that Sweet Baby has worked on. Whether or not someone chooses to use it as a means to either boycott or to lionize is not the prerogative of the person who made the Steam group. If, for example, anti-social justice sentiment was a irrelevant, small, niche thing on the internet, no one would have used it, or if people had used it, they could have just as easily used it to encourage Sweet Baby, like by going out and buying their things. They didn't, though, because whether the person who wrote this wants to admit it or not, the general sentiment among the plebs on the internet is an anti-social justice one. And so by highlighting Sweet Baby Inc. and their own explicit decision to inculcate social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, ESG, what have you, into media is a badge of shame, and that is why it is used to boycott. But there's nothing explicitly boycotting about the language of the Steam group. The Steam group is neutral, and the people who use it however they choose to use it. The only thing that you dislike, it seems, is that you got caught and that people don't like you. Well, you don't get to decide what other people like, and you don't get to decide what your approval in the public is. You do the thing you do, and then people judge it based on how good you are at it or how necessary the thing is to be done in the first place. Because you simultaneously want credit but don't want any negative consequence, you are morons. You don't get to decide. People can only think of you in positive ways. And if someone neutrally catalogs a list of things you've worked on, you don't get to claim it as harassment simply because you know on some kind of paper that people are going to boycott you using it. Moving on.
Last month, sorry, I read that. All right, hold on. The conversation around Sweet Baby Inc. has ignited a fundamentally misinformed Gamergate-esque firestorm. Its employees have faced rampant harassment as a direct result. Industry figures have had to deny allegations that SBI comes in and completely changes their games. I spoke with several employees of Sweep to learn what the company actually does and how the misunderstanding of its role in the industry highlights a far broader problem.
It's not a misunderstanding. Here's the thing. One, if it can be said that harassment was a factor in Gamergate Mark II, if it can be said, then you started it, because the people who work for Sweet Baby Inc. tried to get that Steam list taken down and the person who made it banned off of the platform. And then and only then did the internet swarm Sweet Baby Inc. because they knew that they were trying to get someone canceled. They were trying to get someone blacklisted from Steam on the grounds that someone was telling on them. But here's the other thing. I know full well that when Sweet Baby Inc. is selling its wares to whoever they want to sell their wares to, they use their insistence on inculcating DEI or ESG or social justice as a selling point to convince people to buy them. But here's the problem. You may want to live in a world where you will suffer only the positive consequences of your actions. But that is not how this works. You can't simultaneously be proud and open advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or ESG, 1 minute, and then suddenly disavow it the second you get negative consequences for it. If you sell yourself as the narrative consultancy that gives diversity, equity, and inclusion, or ESG credentials, then you will suffer both the positive consequences of that and the negative consequences of that. You don't get to sell yourselves as something, and then the second you get negative feedback or negative consequences from it, suddenly distance yourself from the very thing you were using as a selling point when you were getting positive feedback for it. You have to, if you, the old saying goes that if you live by the sword, you must also die by the sword. And this is the problem. You want all the positive attention you get from being a diversity, equity, and inclusion or ESG company, and yet not get any of the negative consequences from being the same thing. You can't do that. Either you stand by the fact that you are an organ of social justice, in which case you will get both positive and negative attention as a result of it, or you can disavow social justice, but you can also therefore not get the positive attention you would otherwise get from that from the elites, quote unquote. Moving on.
What bad actors think companies like Sweet Baby do? The industry has had its fair share of struggling massively to wildly expensive games like Suicide Squad fall short of expectations. The loudest members of Sweet Baby Inc. detected Discord. The company is directly responsible for those failures. No, it's the full thing. Sorry. According to the loudest members of Sweet Baby Inc. detected Discord, the company is directly responsible for those failures, not those that employed them in the first place, because of the content allegedly forces into games.
Okay, no, you're strawmanning your opposition here once again. We are fully aware that people employ Sweet Baby Inc., but that still is part of the problem. The problem is not the company. The problem is not the apparatus. The problem is the ideology. The insistence on social justice being prioritized at all. Whether or not there is a quote unquote narrative consultancy that handles that particular element or not is not the problem. The problem is Sweet Baby Inc. exists to serve the ideology, and companies hire Sweet Baby Inc. in order that their product might serve the ideology. So people who dislike the ideology of social justice, the ideology of neo-Hegelian deconstructionalist critical theory, however you want to put it, they see the existence of a company like Sweet Baby that solely exists to serve that ideology as a smoking gun, as a red flag, as an indicator that the company in question chose to cock to the ideology, chose to prioritize the ideology over in-universe logic, characterization, gameplay, etc. The kinds of actual objective merits that you want a game to have, especially a AAA game, because AAA games are supposed to be the blockbusters of the video game industry. They're supposed to be the kinds of things that you go to experience the best that the industry has to offer. And when said AAA games make it very clear by hiring a company like Sweet Baby that they are trying to prioritize the ideology over meritocracy, that is a point of backlash. And companies like Sweet Baby, whose explicit purpose is to push the ideology, will therefore experience some of that backlash in the same way as back in the day when it was the family values tradcons being the moral arbiters of civilization and being censorious about it. Any company that existed to quote unquote Christianize an IP that wasn't explicitly Christian otherwise would have been treated roughly the same way if they existed in the internet space. The only difference is back in the day, the only internet there was the internet of, the 1990s. Whereas now, the internet is pretty much all pervasive. It touches on just about every facet of our lives. And as a result, it is a much better barometer of what the general plebs on the general bottom rung of society think, what the actual, quote unquote working class or quote unquote populace actually think. And you don't like that the general populace of the world is not on board with your ideology. Well, you're not entitled to have them on board with your ideology. If your moralistic ideology conflicts with meritocracy, people are always going to, all other things being equal, prioritize the merits of the thing over the moral virtues of the thing. And as a result, where morality conflicts with meritocracy, morality will get fucked and memed the shit out of and made fun of, etc. Moving on.
Right. Even games that are widely considered to be successes are not safe from these conspiracy theories. Excuse me.
Sweetheart, they're not conspiracy theories when you straight up admit to them and want praise for them. You can't simultaneously get credit for the things you want credit for and also disavow it as and when it's inconvenient for you. You yourselves made it a point to point out that you served this ideology because you wanted moral credit and pats on the back for it. Well, given that the average person doesn't like the ideology, therefore, when you admit to the ideology, you just as much put a target on your back for it. Moving on.
Let me reread that because I stopped mid. Well, it wasn't mid sentence. It's part of the whole thing. Even games that are widely considered to be successes are not safe from these conspiracy theories. Alan Wake 2 game director Kyle Rowley took to X, formerly Twitter, on March 3rd to dispel rumors that Sweet Baby Inc. was the reason protagonist Saga Anderson was black. A rumor traced back to the aforementioned October 2023 Kiwi Farms post. It's absolutely not true, Rowley wrote, but Rowley's concise statement, and similar ones made by other industry members, have not silenced the conspiracy theorists. On March 5th, I managed to spend an hour or so in the Sweepy Inc. detected Discord before I was booted from the space, likely because I identified myself as a otaku journalist. In it, members shared posts referencing Feminist Frequency founder Anita Sarkeesian, Marcus Aurelius quotes, and pictures of idealized female bodies in games. One image showed several pictures of the protagonist Eve from Korean developer Shift Up's upcoming action game Stellar Blade, juxtaposed against female characters from Overwatch, Forspoken, and Life is Strange. Embrace tradition, reject modernity is emblazoned on the
Emblazoned.
Oh. I do want to point this out that the person who posted that on that Discord did two things wrong. While I won't disagree that there are some in there and they all have that haircut that we're all familiar with.
Yeah, the I lost a fight with a electric razor fight.
I mean, some can pull it off. I got no problem with the hairstyle. I think it's just that's become synonymous with a certain brand of person.
The deliberate asymmetry and the deliberate anti-aesthetics bothers me. I will admit that it does.
I won't disagree with you there, though. Again, a little sidetrack here, obviously, but if it's stylized in a way, I think it can work. Oftentimes, it's never stylized. But Zarya from Overwatch 2 and I believe V from Cyberpunk, you're kind of forgetting that they're both characters who actually have like full on. The other games, like I think one's from the new Saints Row game, they got critically bashed, and Life is Strange and Forspoken, again, games I've heard not good things about. Well, basically what I'm saying, obviously, is like the person who posted that is just kind of, I don't want to how to phrase this.
It's a simple compare and contrast. Honestly, I don't see anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
As for the meme, which is exactly what it is, the meme of reject modernity and embrace traditionalism or tradition. while there are some people who post such things that are actually traditionalists, and I have made no secret of the fact that I find traditionalists to be morons, um, while that is a small percentage of the people who share the reject modernity, embrace tradition meme, most of the time, what that meme signifies is to highlight the deliberate, in most cases, um, inversion or anathematizing of mathematically beautiful aesthetics in favor of anti-aesthetics for ideological reasons. That's what most people take issue with these kind of games. When you deliberately go out of your way to avoid anything that you could consider intersubjective or objective beauty, that is when you know it's a postmodernist, deconstructionist, critical theorist, social justice oriented take on a piece of media. And invariably, when you go out of your way to do the opposite of what we know to be as close to objectively beautiful as possible, you end up making things look ugly, very often on purpose. And when you make something look ugly on purpose, you are a moron. Irrespective of all the academic woo that led you to the point of making something deliberately anti-aesthetic on purpose. And by the way, I don't want to hear this, but grotesqueness can also be an aesthetic thing. Because here's the thing. Even things that are meant to be grotesque have beauty standards about them. That's why we can, for example, say creatures from a Tim Burton movie or a Guillermo del Toro movie can be beautiful while also being intentionally grotesque. Being intentionally monstrous, intentionally grotesque, does not mean you are devoid of aesthetics. A good monster design or a good intentionally grotesque design still has a level of beauty, a level of mathematical symmetry, a level of angular distribution about it that makes it beautiful. A good color scheme, a good art style, a good stylization design, etc. So even things that are meant to be ugly in universe can and should be aesthetically pleasing by some metric. What we are highlighting here is the deliberate inversion of any kind of stylization or aesthetic in favor of deliberate ugliness, both in and out of universe. Moving on.
Almost 2K members. There are already a bunch of infiltrated, sick SIC people here screenshotting everything, sadly. So just keep it cool, brothers. We can't let this server or the Steam group get taken down. That's all I ask. Keep it cool. Read a post from March 4th, which was shared again on March 5th. Several people in Discord expressed concerns about glowies, a term coined by members of the far right for those suspected of being federal law enforcement officials or their informants, attempting to infiltrate their online spaces and set them up for legal consequences.
Okay, by the way, speaking for myself as a classically liberal social democrat who voted for Bernie Sanders both times most recently, the term glowies is not a term coined by the alleged far right. The term glowies is specifically a term created by those who are anti-establishment in their ethos to denote a contrast with the establishment, with the authorities, with the institutions. The fact that you see literally anyone who is opposed to the establishment as far right, even when a good probably half of all anti-establishment voices are extremely far left. Like, for as much as we hate the Antifa types, you can't knock them for being you can't knock them for not having anti-establishment credentials. this does highlight one of your biases here. You think that literally anyone who opposes your normal, your establishment, your institutional narrative is far right, when in actuality, people from all walks of life can oppose the establishment and be united by the fact that they oppose the establishment. And anyone who opposes the establishment is fearful of federal meddling or institutionalist meddling or establishment meddling in their spaces, especially when very often, as a tactic, when those tasked by the establishment to investigate such things don't find enough radicals in the spaces they're told to investigate, they will often go out of their way to gin up violent or criminal behavior so that they can make the anti-establishment perspective look bad. Which, in and of itself, is funny when you consider that that means that it is so much more common to see people behaving normally, even as they oppose the establishment, than it is to actually be radicalized. That the government itself, the establishment itself, has to infiltrate it to radicalize it. Which just goes to show you that the establishment is meaningless and that it should be abolished. But oh well, moving on.
All right. Let me get to the tab. Two members with that spoke with me via Discord DM shared similar sentiments about why they believe the Steam page and subsequent Discard are important, so they can identify games that were developed with support from Sweet Baby Inc. and make an informed decision, in air quotes, when purchasing them. Sweet Baby Inc. is a symptom of other ideological worldviews that I believe have taken hold of the Western world, media, and gaming as a whole. A 31-year-old member of Discord told me. He also insisted, without providing evidence, that Sweet Baby Inc. adds race and identity group quotas to everything they are involved with.
Both of those quotes are both objectively true and based, by the way. Like, it is objectively true that companies like Sweet Baby are symptomatic of wider ideologies that have infiltrated basically everything they can get away with infiltrating in the Western world. That is objectively true. And no amount of reframing and recontextualizing is going to make it not objectively true. That is objectively correct. And I find it funny that even when you went looking for the crazies, you seem to have just found an ordinary dude. Which might tell you something about which side you're on, and which side is actually the histrionic, paranoid perspective, but I digress. And I find it funny that you seem to be implying with that air quotes that you don't think it's possible to be both anti-establishment and also informed, which is just childish. Because, frankly, so much of the establishment is inculcated in a histrionic, moralistic worldview that you literally believe there are fascists and or Nazis around every single corner, and that you are the only moral people in the world, and the only way to be a moral person is to serve the establishment. And yet you think of us as the histrionic ones, somehow. Moving on.
Right. Okay. The Sweet Baby Inc. isn't forcing diversity, it's happening naturally. Though these then companies like Sweet Baby Inc. somehow force game studios to diverse characters and storylines, the reality is vast. Sweet Baby Inc. is a narrative design. That is a thing, by the way. On writing stories and they are not a consultant. That means they ensure games plot points make logical sense and are satisfying to players, and that characters speak and behave in consistent ways. What? Gee, I wonder how the actual company that's making the fucking game.
Yeah, that's a point. If that if that were actually true, you wouldn't need these secondary you wouldn't need these secondary apparatuses. You wouldn't need these narrative design firms. You would just have writers in-house in the company itself doing those things. And moreover, it doesn't matter if the company itself has any on paper force because okay, here's the crux of the thing. There are two different kinds of power. There is overt power, which usually has a paper trail, usually has um, some sort of institutional force. And then there is covert power, which usually by its very nature relies on nebulous cultural or emotional power, moral power to get its ends accomplished without having a need for a paper trail or for institutional power. So it doesn't matter if the company itself has any overt power, any codified power, if they have covert or informal power, you see. And the thing is, Sweet Baby Inc. only goes to companies, at least generally, when they're not blackmailing companies to get into them, which is another thing, but we'll get there. But they're normally only brought into companies that they're already being invited into, which tells me what? That the people in the company already are ideologically sold on the kind of interventions that Sweet Baby Inc. engages with. And here's the thing. If they were only focused on things like in-universe logic or in-universe mechanics, that would be one thing. Although, if they were interested in either of those things, they wouldn't be called narrative consultants, they would simply be called writers, because that is how English works. When you are focused on writing, you are a writer. You are not a narrative consultant, unless you are a Orwellian bureaucrat. But explicitly, and we have Sweet Baby's own word for this, explicitly the elements that they focus on are related to diversity, equity, inclusion, representation, critical theory, and etc. And that being the case, what you have there is not someone focused on in-universe logic or characterization. What you have there is someone who is only interested in the parts of a story, the parts of a narrative that relate to being morally censored. It's essentially a way of having yourself a moral censor without having the decency to just straight out call yourself that. And that's the thing. Once again, and I will say this just like I did last week, if your method of writing, if your method of quote unquote narrative consulting prioritizes a moral lens, a moral framework over in universe logic or meritocracy of the quality of the product you're producing, then your input is not only unneeded, it is counterproductive and will inevitably ruin anything it touches. Because if you prioritize morality over meritocracy, you will get what you pay for. You will get morality over meritocracy, and when morality is prioritized over meritocracy, the thing in question of necessity becomes less merit based and therefore becomes more shit.
Alright. Moving on.
Moving on.
Alright. Narrative designers may also provide a final round of polish like a Hollywood script doctor. For example, the team worked on Suicide Squad long after the story was written. Even then, they joined just to write in-game ads, audio logs, and NPC barks. CEO Kim Belair tells me over video call.
You realize, of course, that the majority of the game is not cutscenes, and therefore the only place you can generally introduce plot or writing or like character dynamics is in cutscenes. So if your argument is, well, it's not like they worked on the game overall, they only worked on the plot oriented or character oriented parts of the game, that's a short way of saying that you worked on the story parts of the game rather than the gameplay parts of the game, which is the part of the game that conveys story, you morons.
I don't know. I was gonna say something.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, okay, hold on. So a script doctor is what, because they're comparing that, is a writer or playwright hired by a film, television, or theater production company to rewrite an existing script or improve specific aspects of it, including structure, characterization, dialogue, pacing, themes, and other elements.
Mhm.
Okay,
And
to be
we
fair,
know,
and it does say script doctors generally do their work uncredited for a variety of commercial and artistic reasons.
yeah, and we know specifically from Sweet Baby Inc.'s own works, from their own employees, that the elements that they focus on most explicitly are related to diversity, equity, inclusion, representation, and etc. Hence, we know that they explicitly focus on the elements of the story relating to social justice moralism.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so scripters are usually brought in for scripts that have been almost greenlit during the development and pre-production phases of a film to address specific issues with the script, as identified by the financiers, production team, and cast.
Yes, and we know once again that the specific elements that Sweet Baby Inc. is brought in to fix is the social justice moralism aspect,
So
because
I
they
don't
said
know.
so.
So I'm not entirely sure if that's an apt comparison. Then
Well, no, it's not, but it's the kind of comparison they're trying to make. But even if we're supposed to draw a comparison between script doctors and narrative consultants, which that phrase will never not sound Orwellian in my brain, but okay. If we're supposed to make that comparison, then I have another comparison for you to help make the comparison actually more applicable, more relevant, which is back in the day, during the Red Scare and the TradCon takeover of Hollywood, you had this thing called the Hays Code. The Hays Code was basically for film what the Comics Code Authority was for comics, i.e., it was the kind of morally censorship, or yeah, the moralizing censorship brigade, where they would censor plots or they would alter scripts or they would alter characters to make sure that whatever was being produced was morally sacrosanct, was befitting the censor. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that at the time, the people who enforced the Hays Code probably did essentially review themselves or were viewed by others as script doctors. But we, in the year of our Lord 2024, can understand that what they're there for is essentially being moral censors. Well, much like them, the people in Sweet Baby Inc. explicitly have aligned themselves with diversity, equity, inclusion, representation, critical theory of various different kinds, and etc. So what you essentially have told us there, by your own comparison, is that Sweet Baby Inc. does for social justice what people who enforce the Hays Code used to do for TradCon quote-unquote family values. And in any case, in the cold light of reality, what's going on there is the companies are choosing to conform to moral censorship in the name of purifying their products morally. Does this, however, make the stories better or more honest or more compelling to the audience? The answer is, was, and always shall be, of course fucking not. Because when you prioritize morality over merit, you will get morality over merit, and as a result, the end result will have less merit in it. And people will be annoyed because the story they were promised is now more shitty because of this extra layer, this extra hoop the company had to jump through for cultural, moral reasons.
Hello, Dragon Turtle. Good to see you. Says sorry for the delay, lost track of time, still catching up to the live part of the stream, watching from start at 1.5 speed. But I hope things are going well for you guys. Yeah, things been pretty chill, pretty cool for myself.
I am feeling better, so that's good. My voice was gone for like the last 3 or 4 days, so
I've been
I'm glad that it's mostly not gone anymore. Yeah.
yeah, I've been busy writing stuff.
Still have a little bit of cough though, unfortunately.
Narrative designers. Sorry, I read that. Okay, so yeah, CEO Kim Belair continues because this is like a whole thing that was on like a video call between them, like an interview.
Hmm.
Yeah, Sweet Baby is at its core a narrative development company that means anything from script writing to narrative design to narrative direction to story reviews. One of the things that we do offer is cultural consultations or authenticity consultations. For us, that generally means that we might be asked to look at a story if there's a character in it who is marginalized in certain way. The studio wants us to connect them with a consultant who can bring a little bit of authenticity, but the perspective is never that we're coming in and injecting diversity. For the most part, it's the reverse. It's that the company has already created a character and they want to make that character more representative and more interesting.
Okay, but here's the question. How do you do that? How do you determine what is authentic? There are two ways which you can and have done that. One is for a person of that identity group to basically create a glorified self-insert character, which usually results in shittiness because when you write that kind of self-insert without knowing what you're doing, you get a glorified narcissistic character who can do no wrong. Or two, you can get that kind of representation by creating some kind of academic consensus, which social justice types also do, using things like critical queer theory, critical race theory, etc., which is founded on an ideological preconception of how identities, or how people with given identities, are supposed to think. The problem is that this academic preconception need not actually map onto any real people outside of academia. And as a result, you prioritize referencing the academic preconception or your own internalized narcissism. It's usually some combination of the two, rather than concerning yourselves with what makes sense in universe or what would make sense based on the parameters of the story itself. And as a result, your perspective becomes informed by an ideology, either through some level of self-inserting going on in your own personal life, which itself has been informed by the academic preconception, or by defaulting to the academic preconception. And here's the thing. We know full well what happens when the identity of an actual person in those groups conflicts with the academic preconception. Namely, as far as social justice is concerned, or believers in social justice are concerned, where the ideology conflicts with actual people within that identity, the ideology is defaulted as correct, and the person with that identity who conflicts with the academic preconception is assumed to have quote unquote internalized self-hatred, otherwise known as Stockholm syndrome. Namely, if I, as a gay person, or I, as a disabled person, tell you that your critical queer theory is full of shit, or your critical ableism theory is also full of shit, I am not seen as an authority on the matter. I am seen as someone who hates themselves and secretly has Stockholm syndrome and have been turned against my own kind. That means that by necessity, what you're doing is prioritizing people who conform to the academic preconception or the academic preconception itself over actual representation. And as a result, what you end up with is an ideological or moralistic preconception of how these things work, rather than an actual informed perspective on how anything works. In a sane world, that would not exist because you wouldn't need to prioritize morality over meritocracy. Wherever morality is prioritized over meritocracy, the end result ends up being necessarily worse and necessarily more myopic, necessarily more two-dimensional, and necessarily less informed than a case where simple meritocracy is the guiding principle. Moving on.
Right. Three Baby co-founder David Bedard adds that, contrary to popular belief, the people making these games want to make the experience better for all players, and that more diversity and representation is a byproduct of that. Detractors would rather believe that there's a shadowy cabal of people forcing them to put that stuff in. They would rather believe a make-believe fairy tale than accept that, he says. Making something more representative and more joyful for a marginalized person in a video game is not a zero-sum game. It doesn't make anything worse for the male character in the game, for the white character in the game.
No, because people aren't looking at this in terms of identity. They're looking at it in terms of meritocracy. What's happening is you have an ideological preconception via many of the various critical theories, be it critical race theory, critical queer theory, critical ableism theory, what have you, that are your preconceived notion of what a person should be represented as. And here's the problem with your worldview, your framework overall. You insist that these identities have a moral component, have a socio-political component. That in and of itself is wrong, full stop. But you assume furthermore that because these identities have a moral and or socio-political component, any person with an identity category who conflicts with the academic conception of that identity category, or that portion of that identity category that has moralistic and or socio-political overtones, must secretly hate themselves and have Stockholm syndrome. That's what internalized self-hatred effectively means. It means you have Stockholm syndrome and have been turned against your own kind. And when the IRL person with those identity categories conflicts with your academic, moral, and socio-political preconception of those identity categories, you do not yield to reality, you yield reality against the ideology, i.e., when a person of, black ancestry or black heritage says, I am not a BLM supporter, political blackness is a fiction, it does not represent me, you do not say, okay, we need to re-evaluate political blackness, TM. You say that black person must have internalized whiteness and therefore his opinion doesn't count. When I tell you that I am not represented by the LGBT movement, I am represented by simply being gay or disabled or what have you. You say to me that according to critical queer theory, the academic conception of gayness has this moral component, has this sociopolitical component, and therefore I must be wrong about my own identity. And this is the canard, because you believe, in defiance of reality, by the way, because so many of the people who oppose social justice are people that you claim to be representing, but don't actually, because your academic conception is wrong. You believe that the only people who oppose your identitarian moralistic nonsense are white people or male people. What actually happens, though, is people of all walks of life, up to and including the people you allegedly want to represent, don't agree with the ideological, moral, or sociopolitical aspects of your ideological preconception and want you to get rid of it. But the moment they point that out to you, you claim that they don't have right to their own identity because the ideology must be more important, must be more sacrosanct than the actual realities of their representation. Moving on.
Right. Okay. The assumption that the team members at Sweet Baby Inc. or any marginalized person for that matter can only offer up content that is based on their identity is incredibly frustrating for the team and for marginalized industry members at large. Motherfucker, that is what you do.
Yes, that is explicitly what you are currently doing. Because you assume that no marginalized person ever has disagreed with the ideology of social justice or with any of the assorted critical theories that you want to lump them into. Well, I'm gonna point this out and it's gonna blow your mind. I am Dalton Mortimer, the authenticator. I am also a physically disabled person. I have spastic diaplegic cerebral palsy. I am also bisexual and mostly prefer men before someone hits me with the "you're just straight and picky" derp logic. But yeah, I'm a bisexual person who 70% of the time prefers men, and I am a practicing polytheistic occultist, and I have been for almost 18 years now. That being the case, I should, in theory, if you're being honest with yourselves, be able to tell you where your ideological conception is wrong and where identities don't necessarily have a moral or sociopolitical component. However, when I point out to you that identities don't necessarily have a moral or sociopolitical component, you do not reframe or recontextualize your conception. What you usually do is you tell me you have internalized homophobia, you have internalized ableism, and you have internalized monotheism for all the fuck I can tell usually. Because sad but true, most of you people think that your academic conception, your moral and sociopolitical conception, is so sacrosanct that any person with that identity that actually conflicts with it must only conflict with it because they are internalizing whiteness or internalizing maleness or internalizing normalness, basically. They're internalizing majority ethos rather than simply that your conception is wrong and the assumption within your conception that every identity has a moral or sociopolitical aspect to it is the core aspect of where you are going wrong. Moving on.
All right. I don't know what word there is, to say bless you for a cough.
It's unnecessary at the moment.
All right. Where was I? Oh, okay. People can't imagine that we do anything else but says they can't imagine that we're just talented writers, sure, that we're talented narrative designers, and that people are hiring us because we tell good stories, because we collaborate well, and because we write video games. They have to diminish
Because
our accomplishments. Hold on. They have to diminish our accomplishments to our identities. They can't imagine that the work I did on Spider-Man was story work versus adding pride flags.
because you explicitly state as much when you are interviewed about it. You cannot simultaneously admit to a thing and then receive praise about that thing from the elites. And then when the plebs disagree with you, they it automatically becomes it's not what that was about or something. But here's the thing, my dear. To most people, and yes, I will speak for most people because I actually do talk to people in the real world significantly more than it appears you do. To most people, the very existence of quote unquote narrative consulting is Orwellian bureaucratic nonsense. When you want a writer, when you want someone who is capable of writing, you get a writer. When you want someone to sociopolitically or morally purify your work or censor it to comply with the aforementioned, you get something Orwellian and bureaucratic sounding like a narrative consultant. If you want to be taken seriously as a writer, my dear, why don't you just be a writer? Why do you have to be a narrative consultant? And of course, the reason when you actually are being honest with yourself and not trying to weasel out of your own implications is because you actually think your identity is central to what makes you a good writer and that there is a socio-political or moral aspect to every given identity. I don't agree with that. I don't want to be taken seriously as a gay writer or as a disabled writer. I want to be taken seriously as a writer, as and when I am engaging in writing or assistant in writing, etc. That's the difference. Most people actually don't view their identities as central to themselves. But when you explicitly make your identity central to yourself, and in particular when you make the socio-political or moral supposition about your identity central to yourself, then people are going to judge you based on that metric, especially when your CEOs, your fellow employees, and the journalists that you interview explicitly point out that that is what your company does. So either you need to fire your you need to fire your coworkers and superiors until you can actually be just a writing firm and not a narrative consulting firm, by the way, because I'm gonna once again I'm going to translate your gobbledygook into normie because it is necessary. If you truly want to be taken seriously, ditch anything that sounds corporate speaky or bureaucrat speaky. And that includes the term narrative consultant. It is not doing you any favors. If you want to be taken seriously for your writing, then you need to bite the bullet and admit that you are a writer. Also, to your point, the reason why people don't take you seriously as a good writer is very often that, as the Sweet Baby Detected thing points out, you are almost as often shown to be responsible for bad writing as you are for good writing. And that's not a good ratio for a writer to be responsible for. So even if we ignore the political gobbledygook that you explicitly made part of the discussion, which okay, fine, the reason why you're not being heralded as a good writer has nothing to do with being racist or sexist or whatever phobic. It has to do with the fact that the end result of your apparent writing work has not been good. And just like every other writer or narrative consultant in history, when your writing is bad or mediocre, you get treated as though it was bad or mediocre. You don't get praise for being bad and mediocre. The only reason why you would is because you would be getting special treatment because of your identity. And you can't simultaneously want all the good aspects of being treated special because of your identity and disavow all the bad ones. You need to live by the sword and die by the sword, or put the fucking sword of identity away. Those are your options. Either you get praised and condemned for your identity that you chose to make central to yourself, or you don't make it central to yourself. You put the sword away and leave it the fuck alone because it's not important. You can't have it both ways.
Moving on.
on.
Okay. Despite the intensity of the backlash over the past few weeks, it's business as usual for Sweet Baby Inc. Companies I work with haven't been scared off. They've actually offered advice and best practices for how to move forward. Practices they have developed after facing harassment of their own. Bel Air tells me, with that kind of support in their and a share writing good stories, the team at Sweet Baby Inc. is determined to forge on and keep working on a litany of games both announced and under wraps.
Well, if they do, then don't be surprised when the on the ground people who purchase games use that company's involvement as a metric as to whether or not to buy the game. I.e., when those games inevitably bomb, we will know who to blame because we will know who was involved with Sweet Baby Inc. and we will know exactly why they are there, namely to be identitarian, moralistic, and sociopolitical censors on the behalf of the industry. And the fact that that censor is invited into the industry doesn't make them not a censor. It just means that the industry is lousy with ideologues at the moment.
We are a narrative company. This primarily is our work. We are not censors. We have no interest in false diversity or in tokenization. We have an interest in making it more interesting, developing a stronger language around narrative. Those are the things that we are really passionate about, Bel Air says towards the end of our conversation. If you're going to come for my work, you can do that. If someone says I wrote a story and you say it's not good, that's totally fine. If you're going to come at me for at least come correct. Don't be loud and wrong.
Okay, but you claim they're being loud and wrong when they come to you pointing out that the ways your interventions are bad are specifically related to quote unquote diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can't simultaneously sell yourselves as the diversity, equity, and inclusion or social justice or representation company and then be surprised when people point out to you that focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and or representation is bunk no matter how you're doing it. Because again, the question is not, are you any good at this representation game of yours? The question should be, should representation be a necessary component of storytelling to begin with? Should we prioritize morality over meritocracy at all? And the difference between people like you and people like me is my answer to that question is no. The only thing you should prioritize in writing is the quality, the merit of the writing. The only thing you should prioritize in story is the in-universe logic of the story, etc. If you can't do that without bringing things like morality, sociopolitics, and or identity into things, then this industry is not for you. There is the door. But you don't get to create yourself a Orwellian little niche and then disavow it when you get caught, and only when you get caught. Because this is the thing. You want credit for things when they're going well, but you don't want to be called out when things are going wrong. And you cannot have it both ways. If you have the sword, you live by the sword and you die by the sword. The only options are deal with both the positive and negative attention in equal measure and don't morally shame either of them, or put the fucking sword away and be judged as an ordinary writer. And the fact that you don't want to do either pisses me off.
Moving on.
Moving on.
All right. After chatting with Sweet Baby Inc., I returned to my Discord DM with one of the members of the group rallying against them. With the help of Belair's own words, I explained that SBI actually does its core focus on narrative work. What SBI actually, sorry, I misread that. What SBI does, its core focus on narrative work, and how DEI is only a small part of their remit. He wouldn't budge, with all due respect. It really just seems like the same thing to me, but just a bit more hands-on in the writing process. The end goal is to insert DEI type stuff into the project they are working on.
Again, that seems to be objectively true. Whether you want to lay claim to it or not, the very notion of a secondary narrative consulting firm is bunk and Orwellian in and of itself, especially when diversity, equity, and inclusion are anywhere in the remit, because that is a moralistic and sociopolitical aspect. People don't like moralism and they don't like sociopolitical gobbledygook regardless. No matter what percentage of the company's remit it is, if it is explicitly one, and it is because they will explicitly advertise themselves as specializing in that aspect when they're not being called out for it, then it is wrong. And the fact that we've normalized there being a distinction between narrative consulting and writing is itself bureaucratic and Orwellian. Because in the world of real people with, no pseudo-intellectual airs to put on, when you want writing, you get a writer. You don't get a narrative consultant. Moving on.
Alright. Sweet Baby Inc. and other industry leaders suggest that this dogged existence on believing one company is forcibly injecting diversity into games is a side effect of a widespread misunderstanding of how games are actually made. Until the industry is more willing to openly discuss development processes, the lack of transparency will continue to be used as a straw man for bad faith arguments that characterize DEI as an imposition by nefarious unseen forces rather than an effort to cultivate a more accurate reflection of the world around us.
It shouldn't be either. It should not be involved at all. It shouldn't be this extraneous layer on top of other shit. And more to the point, no one said, speaking of straw men and bad faith, no one said that Sweet Baby was the only company doing it. No one said that it was one company doing it all. In fact, a considerable part of the problem is that so many companies are just like Sweet Baby Inc. That there are multiple people doing it. If it was just one company, that would actually be a much easier thing to boycott, because we could just drive that one company out of business. but no one ever said Sweet Baby was the only company doing it. They just said that they are the most current explicit example of people doing it, which they are.
All right. Well, that was it for that article.
Yep. Next.
I do want to kind of give Giant Turtle a moment to catch up if he still.
Yeah. How caught up are you, Dragon Turtle?
Yeah.
Now realizing that he can't answer me because if he's not caught up yet, he wouldn't have heard that. But yeah, let us know when you're caught up, Dragon Turtle.
So curious if you, while we are waiting on Giant Turtle's response, have you heard about the Jake Paul and Mike Tyson fight?
I've heard that it's supposed to be a thing. I haven't heard anything beyond that it was supposed to be a thing.
Like, and I don't know why, but apparently a lot of people are thinking that Jake Paul is going to kick Mike Tyson's ass.
No. Jake Paul is
Seriously.
Jake Paul is a lacrosse playing hipster dude, bro. Mike Tyson is one of the quintessential, boxers in the industry. So I fully expect that Jake Paul is going to get beaten the fuck out of. And that's fun too, because it's good when trust fund baby jocks get beaten the shit out of, generally speaking. I'm still waiting for the inevitable. I'm still waiting for the inevitable Sam Hyde Hassan Piker fight. I hope that Sam Hyde hasn't given up on that ambition. I want to see him BTFO set. I want to see him BTFO Hassan. But mostly because the longer Hassan cowers in fear of Sam Hyde, the more of a bitch he shows himself to be. So there's that.
The thing is also that confuses me is body types, or are they similar in terms of boxing styles, from what I understand? Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Like, Mike Tyson's a power boxer. Like, he's got the heft, he's got the skill, he's got the experience. How long has Jake Paul been, like, boxing?
I don't think he's ever had like explicit boxing experience, to the best of my knowledge. Because the Paul brothers, when I first ran across them, were YouTubers.
Yeah, no, I know that. I know that. I used to watch the lines and stuff when that was still a thing.
That's how I'm aware that they're basically hipster dude bros.
Yeah. So,
which is why it's gonna be funny when Mike Tyson inevitably beats the ever living fuck out of.
Yeah, the thing is, like, everyone's excuse on how they say Mike Tyson's gonna lose is that he's old. Motherfucker, have you seen the videos of him boxing? It doesn't matter. He's still got that power. He's still got that punching. He's not that old.
Yeah, he's still in will take apart most men that exist shape.
Hold on.
And it's not like he's ever retired from
He's
boxing.
57. He's 57.
And still in I will beat the fuck out of you shape.
Yeah. He's a heavyweight champion. Hold on. I'm curious about Jake Paul. All right, so he is a professional. He's 27, so they got a 30-year gap between them in experience.
Yeah, but Jake Paul is also very skinny in comparison to Mike Tyson.
He's junior heavyweight.
Like, yeah, well, there's that, but also looking also at their body types, and I'm going to be a little bit of a stereotypical gay bitch for a second here, but Jake Paul's muscles are like high school jock muscles. They're not actually there for they're not actually there for efficiency or function. They're there for aesthetics. Mike Tyson muscles are specifically the kind of muscles you get when you're a professional fighter, namely the kind of muscles that will allow you to fuck someone over. And it is, it is worth noting that physiology makes a difference, i.e., there is a physiological difference between the kind of muscles you build when you want to look attractive versus the kind of muscles you build when you want actual efficiency or power behind them. That's why, even though I find both bodybuilders and powerlifters attractive, given a choice between the two of them, I will take a strongman or a powerlifter every single time rather than a bodybuilder. Because bodybuilders look impressive, but there's not actually a lot of substance behind there's not actually a lot of substance behind their physique. It's there for aesthetics and only aesthetics. Jake Paul is very much the same way. His muscles, those that are there for aesthetics and only aesthetics.
Again,
Mike
it's
Tyson's
weird.
muscles are there to fuck people up as and when they get in his face.
Again,
Which is also why Mike Tyson is, in this humble queen's opinion, more attractive than Jake Paul.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen Friday After Next or the Friday movies.
Hmm.
But
I've heard of
there
them. I
is,
don't think I've ever seen them.
you're missing out. There is a line said by Cat Williams, really prolific comedian who's super fun. He played a pimp in that show, in that movie, which I think also inspired in the Boondocks a character he voiced called a pimp named Slickback.
Yes, I remember a pip named Slickback.
Okay, so you've seen Boondocks, but you haven't seen Friday movies. It's weird. There is a line that he says, "Have you ever seen a Chihuahua fight a Rottweiler?" And Ice Cube's character says, "No," and Cat's character says, "Me neither, but but it ain't pretty. I'm sure." I might be paraphrasing, but
No, it probably wouldn't be pretty.
that's basically my line of thinking of how that fight will go. Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson.
I don't think it's quite that extreme. More like a Rottweiler fighting an XL American bully. If you know what that dog breed is.
No, but either way, I am for sure that Jake Paul is going to get his shit rocked, and I'm going to laugh hysterically.
Yes, because it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch the hipster trust fund jock whose muscles are there basically only for aesthetics and or gym bro posturing, getting the shit beat out of him by someone who actually has strength and or fighting acumen.
So it does seem like I'm not sure if he's catching up or not.
I mean that, yes, also is a point, Dragon Turtle. They don't actually consider the formative parts of a person, which is the other factor. But yeah, let us know when you get caught up so that we can keep moving along.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the sidebar was interesting while we were waiting.
Yeah.
And now I'm just imagining Mike Tyson beating the shit out of Jake Paul and laughing.
I don't even think it's going to be a beatdown. I just think he's going to hit him once, and that motherfucker goes down.
Uh, I will give it to Jake Paul. He seems like he might survive a punch or two. Also, one thing to keep in mind, I don't think that Mike Tyson is going to go full Mike Tyson on him because he wants to give the people a good show. So
Okay, that's fair.
I don't unless Jake Paul says something stupid about Mike Tyson's sainted mother, in which case, yeah, it's gonna be one punch. But
Or an ear bit off.
On the basis that Mike Tyson, in addition to being the kind of person who does have the strength necessary to fuck someone up, also is a professional athlete, is an entertainer. So he probably isn't going to go easy if for no other reason than making sure that the people get a good show. Whether Jake Paul is going to survive more than 3 rounds, I wouldn't put money on that.
If anything, okay, if I'm being charitable, 2 rounds, that's it. Maybe dragged out rounds, but 2 rounds.
I think 3. I think, again, for simple entertainment value, I think they might wind up going for 3 rounds, but I don't think Mike Tyson's charity is going to extend much more than that. That's enough to say it was a sincere fight without being overly charitable to Jake Paul. Now, if Jake Paul runs his mouth, that fight is going to get very, very short, very, very quickly. But that is the question. How much of an idiot are the Paul brothers relative to how much self-preservation instinct do they have? Because if they try to be the stereotypical angry dude bro, which seems to be mostly in their characters, then yeah, that fight's gonna be very, very short. But assuming that they both want to give the audience a good show, I give it 3 rounds and no more than that.
All right. Okay, let's start the Guardian article because it's actually relatively short.
Okay.
I say relative, but
yeah, but it's not going to be quite as long as that first one, I suppose.
Right. Okay, so this is originally from theguardian.com, published March 8th, 2024, written by Kiza McDonald. If I say a name wrong, I'm so sorry. And the title is, It's 10 Years Since Gamergate. The industry now must stand up to far-right trolls.
No, the industry needs to stop being a bunch of moralistic cunts. That's what the industry needs to do. It needs to remember to serve its goddamn fan base. But I digress.
Conspiracy theorists are still routinely targeting and abusing women and woke, in quote, game consultants. With a small studio currently under fire, the games industry's silence is deafening.
Many of the people who are part of Gamergate 2 are women. They're specifically in opposition to the ideology, not the people espousing them. Fuck you. Thank you very much.
Moving on.
Yep.
10 years ago, a game developer's aggrieved ex-boyfriend published a vindictive screed accusing her of trading sex for favorable reviews of her indie game. This was leapt upon by the least savory corner of the 2014 internet, 4chan, and kicked off a harassment campaign that broadened to include all women working in video game development or the gaming press, as well as the industry's LGBTQ+ community.
No, it actually didn't, and many of the supporters of and instigators of Gamergate were also women, up to and including even some feminist women like Liana Kersner, because Liana Kersner was a sex-positive, pro-choice feminist who really hated people like Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn for using their womanhood as a human shield to convince people not to examine her arguments. And that is why people like Liana Kersner are much, much more tolerable, in my opinion, than people like Anita or Zoe Quinn. Also, we have the records of the phenomenon known as game journo prose, and so we know, irrespective of Zoe Quinn's ex, that she did in fact use feminism and or sleeping with games journalists to get good reviews for her game. So it's not just when my ex-boyfriend got mad at me and read, it's we have actual documentation that shows nepotism and ideological corruption within the games journalism industry. But that's why I'm here. I'm here to keep you honest, Miss Writer for The Guardian, whose name I don't remember.
Kiza McDonald.
Yeah, Miss McDonald. You can spew all the lies you want about Gamergate 1 and what it resulted in, but some of us were there and remember what happened, and we still have the necessary data to prove you wrong. So GTFO. Thanks. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. Sensing blood in the water, alt-right agitators on YouTube, and Steve Bannon's Breitbart jumped on the bandwagon and soon began to steer it. And Gamergate, as this manufactured outrage became known, mutated into one of the first fronts of the modern culture wars, driven by social media, misogyny, and the weaponized disaffection of young men. Many of its tactics became part of the Trump election playbook.
The alt-right didn't really exist as a thing until late 2016, early 2017. So that is categorically and factually wrong, because the movement known as the alt-right didn't really begin until the advent of the breakaway of the skeptic community that resulted from the appearance of people like Richard Spencer and John Francois Gary P. Which again, you can spew all the lies you like, but I reserve the right to rebut them as and when they are provably false. The alt-right didn't exist until the advent of Richard Spencer and JF Gary P, and as a result, they could not have been alt-right at the time, because we're talking about mid-2013 through 2015, in which time the alt-right did not exist yet. Never mind that the alt-right was never relevant to anything, even when it did exist, but just to keep you honest, the term alt-right didn't really exist until mid-2016 through early 2017, and as a result, you are provably false when you claim that Breitbart and the alt-right were somehow involved in Gamergate. Considering especially that most of Gamergate at the time, especially, was center-left leaning. Moving on.
All right. This week, a 16-person narrative design.
Brainstormer?
Sorry, Giant Troll just posted. And he said he'd catch up in 33 minutes.
Okay.
This week, a 16-person narrative design studio has found itself at the center of a conspiracy theory that holds as responsible for the insidious prevalence of wokery in modern video games. A group with more than 200,000 followers on PC game storefront Steam, as well as thousands in a Discord chat channel, believes that Sweet Baby Inc. is secretly forcing game developers to change the bodies, ethnicities, and sexualities of video game characters that conform to woke ideology.
no one is saying they are the ones responsible. We are saying that they are the ones who are symptomatic of and indicative of it, because they explicitly made that central to their mission statement. No one is blaming Sweet Baby Inc. for being patient zero of this. We are well aware, as you just pointed out, that this affectation, this moral and sociopolitical affectation, has been a thing for a jolly long time now, going back almost to late 2009. But we do, however, know that Sweet Baby Inc. does explicitly do social justice, and as a result, they are at least symptomatic of and indicative of it. Not responsible, not patient zero, but they are an outgrowth of social justice or wokery, and they do further it, which is what people actually are getting at by pointing them out. Moving on.
All right. They think that Sweet Baby has again. I hate, who the fuck names their company that? I'm sorry. It's just like so. It's
Hipsters.
such.
Hipsters who wanted to sound cool like 20 or 30 years ago and don't realize how uncool they sound when they do the hello fellow kids thing.
All right. They think that Sweet Baby has written and controlled almost every popular video game of the past 5 years, shutting straight white men out. As Trump once again heads out on the campaign trail, this is part of a broader far-right panic about diversity and inclusion that has already resulted in proposed regressive anti-women and anti-woke legislation in the U.S. and elsewhere.
You don't have to be right-wing to be opposed to social justice. I am a classically liberal in principle social democrat who supported Bernie Sanders both times, who hates moralism and ideological puritanism in any of its guises, which does, yes, include critical theory, neo-Hegelian deconstruction, postmodernism, the Frankfurt School, and of course, social justice, otherwise known as wokeism. You don't have to be right wing to oppose social justice, just like you don't have to be left wing to oppose the family values tradcons of yesteryear. An opposition to authoritarian censorious moralism can be a principled stance, which is one axis of someone's political beliefs. And by the way, you also don't have to be male or straight to oppose these things either. Because there are plenty of women who oppose social justice, and there are plenty of gay people, black people, etc., who support social justice. The problem is that when they point themselves out to you, do you reevaluate the ideological substructure of your beliefs? No! You insinuate that these people have internalized self-hatred and have secretly developed some kind of Stockholm syndrome and hate themselves, and or have been co-opted by whiteness and or maleness and or straightness, even if they're not those things. Moving on.
All right. The agency in question has, of course, done nothing of the sort. It is simply a narrative development studio, the video game equivalent of Script Doctors. We've already covered that, so.
They're not the same thing. They are much more equivalent to the social justice or left-wing equivalent of the Hays Code.
Anyway.
It's just that rather than the Hays Code, what you're essentially dealing with now are the initiatives referred to as ESG or DEI. But they are the social justice equivalent of the Hays Code. They're just pointing in the opposite political direction than the Hays Code. Moving on.
Right. It is simply a narrative development studio, the video game equivalent of Script Doctors that works with game developers to ensure their plots make sense and their characters aren't embarrassingly out of touch. The consultancy's mission statement is to make games more engaging, more fun, more meaningful, and more inclusive. It cannot hold on. It cannot dictate that developers feature, for example, black female leads in their games. It does not have the power to dictate anything, but its employees are nonetheless bearing the brunt of an online mob's ire. They are
Okay,
being doxxed, threatened, and abused online.
okay, two things. How do they define meaningful or inclusive? Because that's very important to know exactly what we're dealing with here. How do they define those terms? And two, I forgot what my second point was. Read it again. Sorry.
Okay. The consultancy's mission statement. Hold on. It is simply a narrative development studio, the video game equivalent of script doctors that works with game developers to ensure their plots make sense and their characters aren't embarrassingly out of touch. The consultancy's mission statement is to make games more engaging, more fun, more meaningful, and more inclusive. It cannot dictate that developers feature, for example, black female leads in their games. It does not have the power to dictate anything, but its employees are nonetheless.
Okay. Now I remember. Okay. One, how do you define meaningful or inclusive? Does that inclusion include people who operate outside of or in contravention of your framework? Because this is the thing. Inclusion usually means in this kind of context any kind of diversity except diversity of thought. It doesn't include people of different worldviews, different frameworks, different ideological conceptions, and therein lies at least part of the problem. Two, as I said, how do you define meaningfulness and inclusion? Three, one, if your job is to be, quote, not out of touch, then you definitely should be more open to being corrected by the plebs. Because if your job is at least in part to, quote unquote, not be out of touch, then you definitely want to be sure that you are the ones who arbitrate what in touch means. And of course, three, as I have stated many, many times, there is a difference between overt institutionalist power with codified paper trails and covert, informal or moralistic power which relates more to culture and or ethos, i.e., you don't necessarily have to have overt codified power to have influence. In fact, in many ways, overt codified power is a lot easier to hold accountable because of things like paper trails. Covert, cultural, or abstract power is much harder to police or maintain proper maintenance of because it is by its very nature non-material. It is by its very nature abstracted out to a point that it can't be held accountable, which in many ways makes covert power much more dangerous than overt power. Because covert power cannot be held accountable, whereas overt power can because it by its very nature has paper trails. Paper trails are better than non-paper trails, generally speaking, when it comes to the vector of accountability. Moving on.
All right. But its employees are nonetheless bearing the brunt of an online mob's ire. They are being doxxed, threatened, and abused online. I mean, yeah, no, that's fucked.
Except they're not. They're
Are they,
being
though?
criticized. But okay, one, if this is to be a conversation about harassment, then in this case they started it because they explicitly tried to get someone banned from Steam for basically creating a like documentation list about them. A neutral documentation list, by the way. And they tried to get his account suspended from the website of Steam, and they tried to get the entire list banned. So if it's to be a conversation about harassment, then the company began the harassment. And two, most of what you're referring to as harassment is simply just negative customer feedback. You just like calling any negative customer feedback you get harassment because it adds to your moral legitimacy. And if you want to prove me wrong, provide examples of what you consider to be harassment. And when you provide those examples, this is very important, you don't automatically get taken seriously as a result of them. When you provide examples, those examples will be examined, and whether or not it qualifies as harassment needs to still be determined. You can't just throw any old thing you've been sent as though it necessarily qualifies as harassment. When you are being criticized or held accountable for your behavior, that is not harassment. That is negative customer feedback. You can't frame every negative response you get as harassment just because you think the people who sent the feedback are morally invalid for some reason. You actually have to have something that fits a meaningful definition of harassment, which is the viewers to determine, not yours to determine. Moving on.
All right. 10 years ago, it was a female games journalists and critics in the firing line. This time, it's narrative designers, but the conspiracist message is the same. Diversity has no place in games. Oh my god. If you're a woman, queer, or a person of color working in this industry, you should expect the worst. Jesus.
Yes, you should, because you will expect. What you can expect is that your identity will be tied to a moral and sociopolitical preconception, which is part of the problem. Because you see, people aren't objecting to women and people of LGBT backgrounds or whatever. They are objecting to the moral and sociopolitical aspect of the ideology that those people claim to adhere to, which is why you see people in things like Gamergate, be it Mark 1 or Mark 2, that are people of various different identities that are opposing the moral and sociopolitical aspects of the ideology that these companies claim to be using as a guidepost as to how to speak with these identities. Namely, if you are gay but don't support the LGBT movement, or if you are black but don't like the organization Black Lives Matter, or if you are disabled but don't support the critical ableism theory, you will be told that you have Stockholm syndrome and that you secretly hate yourself, as opposed to the possibility that those groups and identitarian preconceptions might be academically in error in some way. I.e., if you're a woman who doesn't like feminism, you're as good as a leper. If you're a gay person who doesn't support the LGBT movement or is, for example, a part of the LGB movement or gays against groomers, you will be seen as a leper. If you are black but don't support Black Lives Matter, then you're basically the devil, etc. It's the moral and ideological and sociopolitical aspect of the ideology that underpins this preconception that people are taking issue with. And many of the people taking issue are diverse themselves and don't like the fact that this ideology isn't as indicative of their opinions as it claims to be. Because it's really annoying when your enemies try to use you as a human shield. Trust me, I know. It happens a lot.
Moving on.
Yep.
Nathan Grayson of Aftermath and Alyssa McCanth, I don't know, of Kotaku. So the lady we just read, okay, have both investigated the origins and sprawling nature of Sweet Baby conspiracy theory. Its proponents draw preposterous connections between the consultancy and BlackRock and the funding crisis affecting the wider games industry. This is far from the first time since Gamergate that such harassment has spilled over. Depressingly, coordinated abuse against game developers is now somewhat routine, especially if they do something so audacious as to include pride flags in Spider-Man's Manhattan or take their time implementing mod support for Baldur's Gate 3. Okay, that last one actually doesn't sound bad.
Yeah, but is what they're actually talking about meaningfully that, or is there some extra layer on it?
Mm.
Because here's the thing. These ideologues will conflate things, and then they will act as though there is no distinction between those two things they just conflated. They will act as if you're the autistic one or you're the hypersensitive one for noting that the conflation just took place and making an effort to separate the things that were conflated. It's just like what they just did with the whole if you oppose social justice, you must be not in favor of diversity thing. Because they can't bring themselves to the notion that people with diverse identities can simultaneously oppose social justice. The idea that the ideology could be wrong doesn't occur to them.
All right. A full 91% of devs surveyed by the Game Developers Conference last year said that harassment from players was an issue. 42% calling it a very serious issue. Okay.
Again, negative customer feedback does not constitute harassment. I know you want it to because that makes you more morally valid than your customer base. But here is the sad truth. When you are a salesman, you are on a lower rung than your customer. It is your job to provide the product or service and to not demonize or otherwise morally invalidate your customer. The customer actually does necessarily have more latitude to act out against your salesmanship than you do against their customership. Customers are more important than the people that they buy from, almost always. What I'm hearing is that you simply don't like that. And the thing is, the things you don't like are not necessarily immoral or a reason to get histrionically offended. Someone needs to tell you that because your entire ideology is predicated on the assumption that anything I don't like is necessarily immoral. Just like every other moralistic authoritarian in history, you can't tell the difference between things you find objectionable or disgusting and things that are immoral or invalid. Those aren't the same thing. And the more you insist on the assumption that they are the same thing, the more histrionic and authoritarian you look by comparison. If you can't tell the difference between things I find disgusting or objectionable and things that are immoral, then you are the problem. Moving on.
When Gamergate was going on, the silence from much of the video games industry was deafening. Instead of standing up for the people that were being targeted, almost everyone who wasn't being directly attacked by Gamergate's mob stuck their fingers in the ears and tried to pretend it wasn't happening. Media outlets, game developers, and publishers alike, perhaps motivated by a fear of making things by a fear of making things worse or of alienating what they feared was a sizable part of their audience, failed to speak out in defense of women until it was too late, if they spoke out at all. IGN, then the most popular games website in the world, published a stunningly weak exercise in both sidesism, both sidesism.
Both sidesism.
Yeah. about recent unpleasantries that failed to even call the movement by name.
Sweetheart, you do know that women can be wrong too, right? I.e., not only were the people being criticized individuals, but very often the people opposing people like Brianna Wu, Zoe Quinn, or Anita Sarkeesian were themselves women who happened to be non-feminist or anti-feminist. See, this is the thing I mean about conflation. You in your head just now conflated women with feminist. You conflated a person with an ideology. And when people criticized the ideology or criticized the person on the grounds of the ideology they were holding, you automatically assumed that they were attacking the person as a person or for reason of existing, rather than any of the opinions that they expressed or held, which is the problem. You're seeing people criticize Anita Sarkeesian, Zoe Quinn, or Brianna Wu's ideas, and you're insisting that they must only be doing so for personal vendetta reasons, rather than hold it, rather than the simple assumption that they're holding Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn to the exact same standard they held people like Frederick Wortham or Jack Thompson to back in the day. Because that's what's going on. What actually went on in Gamergate was people like Jack Thompson and Anita Sarkeesian were held to the same standard, but you didn't like seeing a feminist woman held to the same standards as a old white man, even though they were engaging in very much the same sorts of behavior, and even though their arguments were basically identical but coming from different perspectives. And therein lies the problem. What actually happened in Gamergate is people like Anita and Zoe and Brianna were held to the exact same standards that everyone else is held to. But you didn't see that as equal treatment. You saw that as special aggrievement, because you assume by default that women of various different kinds need to be treated better than men of any kind, which is bullshit. Because the rules are the rules for everyone, and special treatment is bullshit. At least it should be. Moving on.
Moving on.
Mhm.
The games industry's failure to speak out decisively did not calm the situation. Doing nothing did not dissuade the mob, merely left people who were in some cases being harassed out of their homes and workplaces, feeling alone, furious, and often afraid. Back then, the main targets were female developers, journalists, and critics. This time, it's a group of narrative consultants.
No one was ever harassed out of their home in Gamergate, except perhaps the supporters of Gamergate. They were frequently swatted. But the figureheads, the Anita Sarkeesians, Brianna Wu's, and Zoe Quinns, only ever gained a higher profile and more resources as a result of the alleged harassment. That's how you can tell that they were the establishment, or they were the handmaidens of the establishment, and that the people that were opposing them were the anti-establishment voice. Because when you actually speak truth to power, power tends not to like it. When you're basically the moral handmaidens of the establishment order, any alleged harassment that comes your way only results in your profile going up. Voltaire once said, if you want to find out who rules over you, find out who you can't criticize. I would form a corollary to that opinion, which is if you want to find out where the actual power is, find out what you can most readily criticize and what you can't. Because the things that the establishment actually doesn't want you to criticize, it will penalize you for. The things that it deemed as okay to criticize will only ever end up gaining you more clout. Because no one likes believing they're on the morally wrong side. So they most often frame the people that tell them they're on the morally wrong side as the bad guys. Whereas they frame the people they like or the people that tell them what they want to hear as morally pure put upon victims. Because everyone wants to believe that their side is the side that is the underdog. Even though and even when they have all of the establishment and institutional backing you could possibly imagine. Especially then, actually. Because the establishment likes to believe that it is in touch. And the more it becomes obvious that the establishment is out of touch, the more illegitimate the establishment thereby is. And they don't like ever being illegitimate. Moving on.
All right. In the 10 years since Gamergate, the culture wars that were fermented in gamer forums have spread out to poison almost all aspects of our lives. The last decade has taught us that these people will not simply go away. There may always be those who believe that the mere presence of women and minorities in their video games, or their Star Wars, or their halls of cultural or political power is an affront, a symptom of the woke mind virus.
No, my dear, what we consider to be a symptom of the woke mind virus is things like feminism, BLM, and other assorted activism vectors, be they academic or be they activism related specifically. Feminism is not women. BLM is not black people. Um, the critical queer theory diatribes in academia are not gay people, etc., etc., etc. The thing we are telling you is the thing you don't want to hear, which is identities don't necessarily have or need to, nor do they need to have a moral or sociopolitical component, i.e., you can be a woman without being a feminist. You can be black without ever giving a damn about BLM. You can be gay without ever supporting the LGBT movement, etc., etc., etc. And you're right in the sense that no matter how much you wish it were not the case, until such a time as you break out the jackboots and the black bags, there will always be people willing to tell you what you do not want to hear, as and when the thing you don't want to hear happens to also be true. You just don't like that, much like your parents, you also grew to sell out and then become out of touch. And therefore, your academic consensus is also irrational, abstract, and out of touch. And by the way, quite a lot of the people who tell you the thing you don't want to hear will also be of those sorts of demographics. There will always be gay people who tell you, I am not LGBT, I am simply gay. There will always be black people who tell you that BLM doesn't represent me, etc., etc., and so on. And you have two options. Either you can get over your ideological, moral, and sociopolitical preconceptions and actually listen to those people when they tell you that your academic conception is wrong, or you can insinuate they have Stockholm Syndrome and that they're invalid and shut them up, and we will keep doing this forever. Because the more you try to make people shut up and go away, the louder they are going to scream at you to make themselves heard. End of discussion.
Moving on.
Yep.
All right. I do think for time purposes that the next article we do will be the last article we do, and then we'll move on to the trailer thing.
Yep.
Just because the Verge article is
Time.
pretty long.
Okay.
Yeah. But we have also learned that ignoring them does not help. It only makes things worse. People working at Sweet Baby should not be left to suffer on behalf of the studios that employ them. And individual developers are braver these days about speaking out on social media. The director of Alan Wake 2 posted that conspiracy theories claiming Sweet Baby forced the developer to change a character's ethnicity were absolutely not true. And Mary Kinney, associate narrative director at Marvel Spider-Man developer Insomniac Games, has also tweeted strong denials. But companies themselves need to follow suit.
Just for the record, Sweet Baby Inc.'s public profile has gone up through the roof since this happened, so they are not being silent or harassed. The people being silent or harassed are the people you're framing as immoral. The people you're actively dehumanizing, as is always the case. If you want to find out who actually is anti-establishment, figure out who the establishment lionizes and who they demonize. That is the important question. As a general rule, the people that the establishment is going out of its way to demonize are actually the people trying to speak truth to power and trying to be anti-establishment. That doesn't necessarily make them good, but nor does the fact that the establishment hates them make them evil either. And usually, you will find more of a percentage of people opposing the establishment who are good to neutral than you will people who are actually evil. Because things that are actually evil tend to self-destruct on their own and never become a public spectacle.
All right. Publishers that have worked with Sweet Baby Inc. include Warner Brothers Games and PlayStation's Santa Monica studio. Where are their statements of support? Are they going to publicly defend the people they worked with on multi-million-dollar games, false accusations, or let the trolls control the narrative? They
Considering
don't.
that the alleged... Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, as while they do have the right to defend them, they also have a right not to either. Like, they can choose
Yeah,
not to do that.
they don't have to side with you, and that's what's pissing them off. They want to be morally validated so bad, and they don't seem to realize that they don't necessarily have the moral high ground. And also, by the way, the alleged trolls are usually the actual customers, and so any given company would be better off to side with their own customer base as opposed to the moral censors they hired to get Twitter off their backs. Twitter and or academia. But yeah. But as a general rule, it's better to be neutral and not involve yourself in morality or politics to begin with. You're there to sell a product, you're there to focus on meritocracy. Do that and your audience will be grateful. Refuse to do that on the grounds of morality or sociopolitical gobbledygook, and you will piss people off. The only people you will piss off if you focus on meritocracy, though, are by their very nature people who think that morality is more important than meritocracy. And such people should never be listened to ever, frankly. Meritocracy is always better when you're talking about products, when you're talking about industries, when you're talking about art, or when you're talking about things that people choose to buy. Morality is not the issue. Meritocracy is the issue. And as and when they are opposed, you are better off siding with meritocracy and against morality. Doesn't mean they have to be opposed, mind you. They can just as easily overlap. And when they overlap, then by all means go right ahead. But when they are opposed, your job should be to prioritize meritocracy over morality. Because usually when they're opposed, It's because someone made them oppose. Because that's not something that arises organically. Meritocracy and morality don't tend to be opposed unless someone is overtly making them opposed to one another. Because generally, people are more than happy to have the two things overlap almost entirely, and everybody wins. Anyway, on to the verge of my sanity. But
Nobody is forcing diversity into video games. It is happening naturally as players and developers themselves diversify. Gamergate didn't intimidate women out of video games 10 years ago, and we won't be intimidated now. The games industry knows that a greater breadth of content featuring a greater breadth of characters made with the contributions of a greater breadth of people is good for creativity and for business, no matter what some aggrieved gamers may think. This time, it must make its support perfectly and unequivocally clear. Okay, Don, before you do, because I know you're going to go into a diatribe about this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so rewinded it back maybe 20, 25 years, early 2000s, yada, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at all the characters in video games at the time. They were all very unique, very different.
Mm-hmm.
So they became very much pillars of the gaming industry that was growing. Now, look at characters that have come out in the last, minus like big blockbuster games, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like this, there haven't really been any characters that have stood out. Well, that have gone to such heights as the. I mean, you could possibly make an argument for some. I'm not going to deny there were some that came out that are actually really great.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of design, in terms of characterization, and things like that, most of the time, there haven't been really characters like that. There isn't really like a huge plethora. It's very much like, I don't want to say a handful, but a small number of characters that I think can be timeless if given enough, given more games to come. But
Yeah.
nothing, but an overall factor, nothing really has come out that is of.
Things have moved backwards rather than forwards.
Yeah.
Because of the advent of things like social justice.
Well, that, and also I think here's the weird. This is a weird like thing with me. There isn't. They're not. The games also have focused a lot on trying to look photorealistic, and hasn't really been like
and photorealism is anathema to stylization.
Yeah, it hasn't. I mean, even like games that are photorealistic but have a style to them, like I guess Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, or I mean, maybe an argument could be made for like the Call of Duty games, some of them at least. But yeah, it's a very, very like
the industry is dying because someone somewhere decided that it was important to prioritize morality over meritocracy. And as I have repeatedly stated, when you prioritize morality over meritocracy, you get what you pay for. And if what you pay for is primarily morality rather than meritocracy, you will get morality rather than meritocracy, especially when a subset of your morality insists upon being deliberately anti-aesthetic, deliberately anti-merit. And when you create an industry or subvert an industry to being primarily anti-meritocracy, is it any wonder that the industry will backslide? when your base assumption is aesthetics is immoral, when your base assumption is the player's enjoyment is immoral, we have to prioritize deliberately spiting aesthetics, deliberately spiting the fans, deliberately spiting the lore or the in-universe characterization or the in-universe logic. Then, as a result of that, you will get that. You will get something that deliberately spites aesthetics, deliberately spites in-universe lore, deliberately spites characterization, deliberately spites fan service and the fan base that likes a given game. And as a result, the end result will have less merit. But anyway, back on point. Feminism is not women, my dear. And many of the people who supported Gamergate back in the day, as well as now, are women. What they are not is ideological feminists. And the same goes for every other alleged minority demographic you want to insist upon. Feminism is not women. BLM is not black people. Critical queer theory is not gay people, etc. And the fact that you think that there is some moral or socio-political aspect that is inherent to a person's identity is the problem. Gamergate was never opposed to women. It was opposed to feminist and other ideological identitarian nepotism. It was opposed to quote unquote capital B blackness. It was opposed to critical queer theory, etc., and so on. Things that were born in the Frankfurt School and in the aftermath of the advent of Hegelian dialectics, rather than actual identities. And the thing is that frustrates people is when people tell you, I am part of this demographic and this ideology of yours does not represent me, you tell them that they hate themselves, they've internalized self-hatred, and they essentially have ideological Stockholm syndrome. But anyway, moving on.
All right. So, like I said, this is gonna be the last article we cover for tonight, and then the article we had, the Verge article that we were gonna do, which is relatively longer, will be the one we do next week.
Mhm.
This is from takethis.org. Responding to Gamergate 2, and this was published March 11th, 2024.
By the way, TakeThis.org is a quote-unquote nonprofit that has ties to the FBI and CIA, in case anyone was curious. They've actually convinced the FBI and CIA that gamers are terrorists.
Okay. If you're reading this, you've probably been hearing about what's now being called Gamergate 2. It's the latest targeted harassment campaign within the games industry, and it's aimed at Sweet Baby Inc., a Montreal-based narrative development studio. The campaign also has been impacting entities and games associated with Sweet Baby. Journalists covering the issue and others associated in various ways with the targets. You also may be at a loss to know how to talk about this issue and what, if anything, you can do about it. That's where we come in. Bless you.
Is it? I mean, it's hard not to make Fed posting jokes because this is literally a company that was asked by the FBI and CIA to inform them on this topic. So this is as close to literal Fed posting as I think anyone could ever get uncontroversially. And we wonder why the government is full of idiots when people like this are who they're taking their marching orders from.
So, moving on.
Yep.
All right. Discord Steam and X have been the predominant platforms where the abuse and harassment has been taking place. In these spaces, lists of game studios, companies, and associated organizations have been circulated for targeting by members of the mob. Large
If
scale harassment.
if if you want to talk about harassment, my dears, then I must point out to you that in this case the harassment started with Sweet Baby itself, i.e., Sweet Baby itself and the people who work there tried to get someone banned from Steam and tried to get their account removed from Steam and tried to get the Sweet Baby Inc. detected list removed from Steam. Not to mention, they doxed the person who made it, or at least tried to. So if you're going to talk about harassment, then the harassment first and foremost came from Sweet Baby, targeted towards the Brazilian dude who I can't at this moment remember the name of, who made the Sweet Baby Inc. detected list in the first place. Moving on.
Large scale harassment campaigns like this fuel and are fueled by political events. A political rhetoric heats up ahead of the U.S. presidential election later this year. This kind of online activity is going to ramp up, and it's important to understand that these phenomena are interrelated.
If anything, the causality is in the opposite direction because Gamergate 1 predated Trump by a good solid 3 years.
Hmm. Moving on.
Yes.
As scholars and journalists have noted, the targeted harassment, hate, and cultural norms that were at the heart of Gamergate in the mid 2010s never went away. People in game spaces, especially marginalized developers and content creators, face hate and harassment daily. In fact, research conducted by Take This has outlined an entire spectrum and typology of extremism and dark participation in games that is bigger than any one movement but underlies all of them. It can be scary or uncomfortable to think about, to talk about, and to understand. In overwhelming situations, it's not unusual to feel at a loss or to have thoughts of helplessness, but there are things we can do to mitigate the harm.
See, here's the thing. If you were to ask me what I would consider to be harassment of minority people or minority content creators, chief among those would be the notion that in order to disagree with an ideological preconception, a person has to hate themselves and secretly have internalized the opposite perspective. That, to me, strikes me as dehumanizing. It strikes me as dehumanizing to believe that you must either agree with an academic preconception of you or you have Stockholm Syndrome and hate yourself. That, to me, sounds like dehumanizing of minority perspectives. But what the fuck do I know? I'm just pointing this out because you claim that we are the people harassing people here, irrespective of the fact that we are ourselves, in many cases, minority groups. But in most cases, the people doing most of the dehumanizing or reframing are the journalists and academics who write these kind of articles in the first fucking place. Your assumption that I can't oppose these groups or identities, or rather ideologies, without abdicating my entire identity is dehumanizing, is harassing. And given that I am a quote unquote minority content creator, then I expect an apology from the journo class and from the academic class. But I'm never going to get it, you see, because unlike you, I'm not a stenographer to power, and therefore when I talk, it usually actually is speaking some kind of truth to some kind of power. Moving on.
For everyone, it is extremely important to speak up and up for folks who are being harmed. Support can take on many different forms. This could be an email or a quick check-in with the people in your orbit who are targets of the harassment or are close to those targets. Family members, colleagues, and friends of those targeted also experience different types of harm in these situations. During organized harassment campaigns, sometimes are forced to leave social media and online activity for a time, and they often need help filtering messages, dealing with threats, and maintaining their mental well-being. People of marginalized identities often already have some of these tools in place out of historical necessity, but the volume of large campaigns like this can quickly become overwhelming. The Still Relevant Games Hotline website hosts a digital safety guide that can support people experiencing or at risk of experiencing targeted harassment.
And see, this is why I oppose articles like this, because this itself qualifies as a form of targeted harassment. And I am here to speak for all of the minority opinions who get dehumanized and invalidated by journalists like the kind from Kotaku, like the kind from The Verge, like the kind from The Guardian, and most recently, like the fucking feds, who take the opinions of TakeThis.org as sacrosanct for some reason. So yeah, I am double checking on all the minority people in my audience because I oppose things like you. You people are the people who claim the moral high ground. You people are the people who claim the academic ethos. You people are the people who claim the institutional hierarchy. And you people are the people who are in the business of dehumanizing any perspective that is minority enough to disagree with you. And so, yes, you are the harassers, and you are the reason why people like me do what we do. Because someone needs to tell you that you are not the holders of the moral high ground. You are not the intellectual elite. You are not the sacrosanct institutional legitimate. You are not the arbiters of what is normal. And you can, in no uncertain terms, go fuck yourselves, especially those of you who associate with the feds. Blow it up your own ass, you assholes. Moving on.
For industry leaders, you may be inclined to be quiet or cautious, but that's actually not helpful. Noted in our resource empowering, sorry, as noted in our resource empowering the game industry, a major lesson learned from GamerGate was the importance of taking a loud public stance. At the time, studios were hesitant to address the hate and abuse from gamers in any meaningful way. The reasons varied, but usually the hesitation was born out of fear of losing profits or concern that taking a stance would attract the attention of the Gamergate mob.
No. What? Again, it's funny. That is good advice, but it's good advice for gamers opposing you. We should not be silent. We should be loud, and we should inform you in no uncertain terms that you are not the arbiters of the moral high ground, because you are the moralistic ones. You are the censorious ones. You are the authoritarian ones, and you are the people who are engaged in a mass dehumanization campaign. So you people and anyone you support can go fuck yourselves, and I reiterate, the feds, who may or may not be listening to me as a result of responding to this article, may shove it up their own assholes, frankly, and in no uncertain terms. Moving on.
And this is a quote, not sure from who. The thinking went, we want to protect community from Gamergate, so by being silent, we will avoid inviting the pro Gamergate crowd to our forums and into our community.
The problem you have, my dears, is that Gamergate actually represents the plebs, actually represents the on the ground perspective. and so they are the majority of your audience. Even though you would like to live in a world where the academic conceptions were always correct about everything, you don't, because they're full of shit. They are the authoritarian, censorious moralists who are so addicted to abstraction that they literally cannot see the world for what it is, let alone seeing the world for what they think it is, which even in most cases they can't do that either, because they're so ideologically warped that they can't decide what their ideological preconception means most of the time, let alone actually interfacing with reality. So yeah, the reason why that didn't work is because most of your customer base was Gamergate by default, because most of your customer base are libertarians, populists, and left-leaning centrists who are opposed to social justice. The fact that you think that social justice is normal is only an affectation of your being an elitist, and your being an institutionalist, and your being hyper addicted to the authoritarian, censorious nature of the Overton window, which, whether you like it or not, has very little and constantly shrinking relevance to anything. You are not the arbiters of truth. You are not the arbiters of morality. You are not the arbiters of legitimacy. You are not the arbiters of validity. You are out of touch, authoritarian, censorious, malignant twats. And you can go fuck yourselves.
Right on.
Yeah, moving on.
However, the failure to take a stand and clearly communicate with the community backfired, with another quote here. Without an explicit statement from the studio, toxic, misogynistic behavior was not welcome. The studio found that pro Gamergate individuals assumed the studio's game was a safe space for them to build community.
I find it to be kind of adorable that you think that had you said anything, it would have actually calmed anyone down, because that once again assumes that you and the institution that you represent and or the establishment perspective that you arbitrate with are the moral authority. But let me make this very clear to you. If your companies come out and say something like, you know, you fascists are not welcome here, da 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 da, or some other such thing, all that will do is make people boycott you harder.
Mhm.
Because what we're trying to get through to you is that you don't live in a Bosch rendering of an Orwell novel, okay? You don't live in a world where there are Nazis around every fucking corner. You don't live in a world where fascism is on the ascendancy again. The worst thing that we have to deal with being on the ascendancy again at the moment is authoritarian moralism, of which there are two flavors. There is the TradCon family values flavor, as there ever was from yesteryear, and then there is the critical theory infused post Frankfurt School neo-Hegelian perspective, known broadly as either wokeness or social justice, which is a authoritarian moralistic perspective, whether you want to admit it or not. And the correct response is to get rid of either of these. Authoritarianism, censoriousness, and moralism should not be welcome anywhere, period. Fascism is not on the rise. What is on the rise, however, is histrionic moral pearl clutching under the assumption that fascism is on the rise. And if you truly want to be self-aware, if you truly want to get out of your bubble, you need to stop fighting the last war, or what you think the last war was, and actually deal with the populist and, broadly speaking, libertarian people who are the majority of your customer base. The people who are opposed to moral meddling, be it the TradCon kind or be it the social justice kind either. The problem is that you see only one of these as a problem, and you see the other one as the truth. And therein lies the crux of the problem. When you think that moralistic censoriousness is the truth, you will allow yourself to believe that there are immoral bastards behind every corner, because that's the only way that your world can make sense. Because if you genuinely believe that the only reason people would disagree with you is if they were morally invalid cretins, then you need to make up any number of morally invalid cretins to oppose, because what you'll find out in reality is a lot of people oppose you for reasons other than that, but you can't countenance any reason other than being morally invalid why people would disagree with you or the establishment narrative. Moving on.
All right. In other words, fair to clearly and unequivocally denounce Gamergate and the harassment and abuse done in its name created a space for that hate and abuse to flourish, spread, and become normalized. Hate, harassment, and toxic behavior have no place in games. By taking direct, targeted action in a timely manner, we can mitigate further harm to talented, dedicated folks in games and help prevent additional recurrences of these harmful events.
I disavow the hatred, toxicity, and harassment of social justice. I stand with Gamergate against either TradCon family values moralism or social justice moralism. Period. I stand with anyone who is libertarian and or populist and is opposed to histrionic moralism at all. I stand against anyone who stands against Gamergate because Gamergate is the populist and or libertarian movement in gaming. And it stands in stark contrast to either the Gavin McGinnis's and Matt Walsh's of this world, who are spreading TradCon family values, or the Karen, the rainbow-haired Karen perspective of neo-Hegelian social justice post Frankfurt School. That's who I stand for and against. I stand with Gamergate against social justice. That is who I stand for and against. And I stand with Gamergate against TradCon family values as well, because neither of these authoritarian, moralistic, censorious twits should have any public perspective whatsoever. They're free to exist. They're free to be as irrelevant as they possibly can be, but I will truck no relevance in their direction. Neither family values tradcons or critical theorist social justice warriors have any relevance at all, and I will see to it that that remains the case, with my dying breath if necessary. Gamergate good, social justice and family values bad. End of discussion.
Right. All right. So this might be the last thing we cover tonight. I'm not sure. In case if we still might have time. Because we have talked about it before in the past. This is the official trailer for Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scar Giver.
Are we using Grandma's peach tea again as the pause word?
I don't think we did that, actually.
Didn't we? I thought we did because Zack Snyder.
I don't remember. So I do want to bring up this because again, I'm hearing a lot of conflicting things about the movie. Zack Snyder hasn't really been well known for making. It makes visually interesting movies. It's the substance of that.
Yeah,
style.
he's very good at visuals. He should find himself some sort of position that focuses primarily on visuals and let someone else handle the writing and direction.
Well, no, I think he can be a good director. He does need a writer that can bounce off him, like and tell him no or what to do, a creative partner.
Yeah, he needs to be the visual. He needs to be the guy in charge of visuals when it comes to movies, and leave writing and direction to everyone else. I think he and Michael Bay might make an interesting team.
I I don't know about that.
Because I think they're cut from the same cloth. And they might wind up amplifying each other's strengths.
And neither of their strengths involve writing or characters or
No, but like maybe if they were a duo, they maybe they if they were a duo, they would sort of um have a rapport similar to the rapport we kind of have, and that
eh.
might result in them having better writing.
Anyway,
Either that or I'm trying to think of who else is kind of in that same vein of like pseudo action movie type stuff that doesn't actually, you know what, Zack Snyder and James Cameron would make a good pair.
I mean James Cameron's already got Robert Rodriguez though, so
Well, but that's the thing. I think Robert Rodriguez deserves better than James Cameron.
anyway, so this is gonna be the trailer. So banana.
Peach tea.
I'm gonna be honest. I think it was actually just genuinely peach. Like, I want to believe that Zack Snyder did not make Lex Luthor that crass.
He did though. You know he did. You can want to believe it all you want, but it's not true.
Anyway,
Peach tea?
banana.
No, peach tea. Ah shit, I can't see it. It's doing the buffering thing. I'm gonna have to come out and come back in.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Now I can see it. Anyway, peach tea.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Peach tea.
All right. Banana.
Okay, these visuals
So-
are amazing.
I mean, again, it's Zack Snyder. I'm not surprised the visuals are good. And apparently now they have lightsabers. Like they're being more overt with the Star Wars references.
Honestly, I'd say just go for it at this point. Like Disney
Yeah.
has well and truly befouled the corpse of Star Wars so long that it's like we'd be better off with Zack Snyder's off-brand Dune meets Star Wars thing. So,
Yeah.
and speaking of Dune, one thing I will say is visually speaking, at least this is better than Denis Villeneuve's take on crap. So
You couldn't go one moment without it.
no, because it's so bad, and I want better for Dune as an IP. And there's actually a documentary about a version of Dune that almost was, and it sounds so much better than Denis Villeneuve's version. So
Action was pretty cool too.
yeah, which
Sorry,
Zack Snyder has always been good at choreography with regards to either visuals or action. That's never been one of his. That's never been one of his weaknesses. Can't speak to the rest of the plot, but you're doing better than Dune, so that's something.
All right.
Each team.
I don't know.
Their nightmare is you and I fighting together.
You must know you cannot win.
Anthony Hopkins is always a win.
You're all here.
So there's supposed to be like 3 parts, obviously like acts for a whole movie.
I think so.
Okay, yeah, because this certainly feels like a second act.
Yeah, Zach has always had a bit of a long-windedness problem, which I know I have literally and figuratively no leg to stand on there. But still.
I mean, it's kind of one of the reasons why I'm not like the biggest fan of Zack Snyder's Justice League movie.
That being said, it does tend to be better when Zack Snyder is left to his own devices than when studios meddle. So
yeah, it's super weird. Like, I mean, again, I do think there are a lot of stupid things he's like creatively he did in BVS, but the Ultimate Edition was just genuinely more cohesive,
coherent.
Yeah, cohesive, coherent. Than the one I'd seen in theaters.
Yeah, because it was missing like a half an hour of necessary plot information.
Yeah, it's weird how someone actually approved that.
It's like, what? Wait, why are we cutting out like half an hour's worth of necessary plot exposition? Well, because the movie's too long. Yeah, but without that half an hour, it's not gonna make any fucking sense. I don't know, cut it out anyway.
To be fair, well, the 30 minutes was he had a lot of unnecessary plots and stuff.
I mean, he did, but it's still a more coherent movie than.
No, I agree. I agree. I'm just saying. Again, I agree with all. It just kind of really does boil down to the whole long-windedness.
Well, because that Zack Snyder, both to his credit and to his discredit,
detriment.
He wants everything he touches to be epic, which is not fair. Which is not a bad instinct. It's just that he's not always capable of delivering on his desires.
It never. Okay, I think the main issue, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong. The main issue with him wanting everything to be epic is that sometimes the moment the epicness is not built up to correctly. Therefore, it doesn't really feel earned.
He can't land it. He can
right.
He can.
Yeah.
He
Yeah,
can
that's
build things up, but he can never deliver on them. Which, although, and I will say this, I will give Zack Snyder some faint praise. I actually respect him more than I respect someone like Christopher Nolan or Denis Villeneuve, because at least Zack Snyder swings for the fences.
mhm.
Someone like Christopher Nolan or Denis Villeneuve deliberately makes the stories they're telling more boring than they should be on
Right.
purpose.
I,
And I can
I
never and I can
again, I
never
agree. Like,
respect that.
yeah, Zack Snyder can go weird, and I can respect that. It's just, uh, what's the sorry, hold on, give me a second.
He needs
He
he
just
needs he needs a collaborator. He needs someone who can finish tying up what he starts. Because that's the
yeah,
thing. He starts things, but he can never land them. He can
right.
never
And
justify the scale, and that's part of
I
the
mean, you
problem.
can you early DC, you might consider that to be David S. Goyer, but even then, that's not really.
Right, but yeah, Zack Snyder needs a strong co-director and co-producer and co-writer who can who can actually land the things that Zack Snyder starts,
Like
who can
again, here's
bring
the weird thing.
his ideas in for a landing.
Right, here's the weirdest thing, and I think I've told you this specifically, Don. I'm not sure if I mentioned it on here, but I'm working on like on podcast. I'm sure but I'm working on a whole revised DCEU thing,
Hmm.
like fully reworking it. I mean, I'm not trying to like overhaul it or anything. We're just trying to make it sure it all. Well, it still technically fits in line with a lot of ideas Zach has. Like what I'm getting at is that Zack Snyder has a lot of interesting ideas. I will fully admit that
He swings
when
for
it
the
comes to
fences, and that's why I
right.
can respect him because at least he tries something.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, it's just like again, it all kind of boils down to what it always boils down for me is the all boils down to for me is the good idea, poor execution.
You know what? I just had an idea, and it's gonna make the entire world sigh with like denied epicness. Imagine if instead of having Zack Snyder and James Gunn lead separate iterations of the DC universe, what if they had the foresight to get both of them working together originally?
I mean that would have been cool, but I don't
Because
know.
like I think they would have made it. I think they would have made an interesting team because one thing that James Gunn does sometimes struggle with is he can't quite do epicness. Well, Zack Snyder can do epicness in spades, and meanwhile James Gunn can do creativity and weirdness in spades. And not to
Uh,
mention, imagine locking them into a room and having them brainstorm together. Imagine James Gunn's weirdness seen through Zack Snyder's lens of scale and epicness. That
well, there's also the thing.
is the
James Gunn also gets character as well.
well, yeah, and to be fair, Zack Snyder does sometimes struggle with that. My
Yeah.
point is that one of the things that we're having an issue with the Gunverse, at least prior to it coming out, is it seems like a lot of the ideas are half finished, and it seems like James Gunn sort of just threw darts at a dartboard and basically went with whatever ideas stuck. I think that if Warner Brothers had the foresight to get a team of writers together before when they were pitching the DCEU the first time, and Zack Snyder and James Gunn were working together. They could balance each other out and amplify each other to such a degree that would be the DC universe worth. Like, that is the best case scenario for the hypothetical DCEU. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world. So now we have one half of the DC universe, which kind of worked in the aesthetic and in the epicness sense, and then one half of the DC universe that is probably going to work in the character and idea sense, but not really work in the cohesiveness or well built or epicified sense.
Right.
Well,
All right.
in a hypothetical alternate universe where Warner Brothers had actually thought things through and gotten both of them to work together, and hell, throw Dwayne Johnson, throw Dwayne Johnson's ideas in there too. Those three working together, they could have done an actual decent rendition of the DC universe.
I don't know about that. Though I think if
'Cause
we actually had like a full discussion about this, we would be here for hours.
We would. Instead, I think we're gonna have to discuss it on Thursday. But yeah, peach tea.
Banana.
Because there is nothing to return to. Dark days lie ahead of us all. We will teach you to fight.
I have really nothing to say. I mean, yeah, it looks fine.
Mm-hmm. I'm at least curious to see what happens, because the problem
will
with
say-
Rebel Moon Part 1 is that Rebel Moon Part 1 was very much a Part 1.
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to watch all three of these back to back and see where Zack Snyder was going with them.
Yeah, I do agree. With the first movie, like the trailers and stuff, there was, well, to be fair, they were supposed to be trailers and they built up hype and stuff, and that's fine. But there seemed to be there was a little more of like dramatism in the first trailers we'd seen for the first part.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little more gravity.
Whereas this is
Like
just a
weight
non-stop
things.
action beat, because I think it's pitching the second act, basically.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that's how the original Star Wars was originally. So,
Mm-hmm.
and this is actually, okay, yeah.
Kind of makes me wish they had given Dune to Zack Snyder instead of Denis Villeneuve.
I'll be honest, like the cynical part of my brain, like immediate response was, he still probably would have fucked it up.
Right, but his method of fucking it up would have at least been more visually and conceptually interesting than Denis Villeneuve's. I'm going to bore the shit out of you, but I'm going to do it technically proficiently. Therefore, you'll have to give me art house props.
Fair enough. Anyway, banana.
Peach tea.
That's impressive. The Scar give us among them. Those this village holds most dear. I should destroy them.
Yeah, this really just feels like pure action.
I don't hate it though. It's
No, I
working.
don't. I don't hate it either. I just, again, I think the first trailers were a little more interesting to me just because, again, it gave you more of a sense of a grandness, I guess, to it. If that
I
makes
think
sense.
I think the ultimately interesting thing is gonna be when, like, watching all three of them together once all three of them have come out and seeing what Zack Snyder essentially originally wanted to do. The whole story rather than 1/3 of it, wait, 1/3 of it, wait, 1/3 of it, wait.
Hmm.
That's the main thing that cripples Zack Snyder is we don't live in a world where movies can have intermissions anymore, so he can't do his like 4-hour epics anymore.
All right, moving on.
Yeah, peach tea.
Banana.
I have no choice but to fight.
Okay, so
Again,
anything else?
Anthony Hopkins is always a win. On
And
all
he
I'm gonna
seems to
say.
be playing some type of druid warlock, druid robot.
Yeah, I didn't know that was the thing I needed, but it's interesting nonetheless.
And again, lightsabers. Or I don't know what the fuck they're gonna call them, but
Plasma swords, basically.
I would go plasma blades. Because that feels like more in line with Zack Snyder's like vocabulary.
Honestly, Zack Snyder and Rob Liefeld just need to make a thing together.
I mean, Rob Liefeld does have his own superhero universe.
Yeah, Zack Snyder presents Rob Liefeld's universe. I would pay handsomely for that.
Yeah, Extreme Universe, I believe is what it's called. And he has been trying to work with Netflix to get it.
Which I mean is probably the most literally perfect and mimetic meme I could possibly imagine. Like Zack Snyder presents Rob Liefeld's Extreme Universe. Yes, please. I would gladly watch that on Netflix. If we're going to go full edgy boy 90s, let's go full edgy boy 90s. Let's commit to the bit already. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because Zack Snyder wants things to be over the top, and nobody does over the top 90s extremeness like Rob Liefeld. So
Though a lot of the cool stuff that I got into with Liefeld's publication, technically he cannot produce, like he doesn't own it.
mhm.
Like
But
Alan
yeah,
Moore Supreme.
yeah, but seriously, let's go full like 90s extreme retro trip and give Zack Snyder with have Netflix give him all the money and then have Netflix buy the Rob Liefeld universe and have Rob Liefeld actually consult with Zack Snyder on the making of the thing, and we would just have the most epic, over the top, cheesy, badass 90s kitsch ever. And it'd be awesome.
Means we'd actually get a live action Youngblood, which is actually one of his better works, from my knowledge.
I like the concept of Youngblood. I don't necessarily like what it did with it, but
That's fair.
that's again, we're dealing with 90s Liefeld. It's bound to happen. But yeah, 90 like
Ironically, the boys.
Liefeld channeling his 90s sensibilities into Zack Snyder would be genius.
Not ironically, but the boys kind of did Youngblood a bit.
They did kind of, yeah.
Though with Youngblood, there is they actually seem genuinely like good heroes or good people.
Yeah, they
Um,
have their like edgy teenage '90s aspects, but they're not dicks for the sake of being dicks.
mhm.
Unlike the majority of the people in The Boys. Although I will say, it does seem like Soldier Boy actually has something resembling honor. He's still,
Yeah.
PTSD to shit and everything, but he does actually seem like he has some aspect of honor. And Homelander, I still maintain, deserves all the hugs. I couldn't give them to him because we know how he reacts to cripples, but someone
Anyway,
someone deserves someone needs to give Homelander all the hugs.
so moving on.
Mm-hmm. Peach
Banana.
tea.
Let Scar give her herself. Are you truly prepared to allow this to continue in your name?
I'm sorry. I won't allow this place to die for me.
Okay, so I think it is somewhat because I believe some of the criticisms for the first Rebel Moon was the main character who's called the Stargiver here. I don't remember her actual name.
Mm-hmm.
Is getting character, like character depth and stuff,
Hmm.
which, I mean, to be fair, that's, I don't know. Again, it's just action stuff, and it's good action, I don't really have anything else to say.
It just needs something to attach itself to, which is why Rob Liefeld, his Extreme Universe, Zack Snyder, all of Netflix's money, match made in heaven.
Mm-hmm. All right, hold on. Banana?
Peach tea.
Yeah, I got nothing else to really. Looks fine. It comes out April 19th.
I'm probably not gonna watch this series until the third one comes out, so I can watch it all in one sitting. The way I think Zack Snyder probably originally intended in the first place.
Mm. I
And
know
then
there
I'm
were some
and then
other.
I'm gonna start advocating that Rob Liefeld's Extreme Universe gets adapted with Zack Snyder at the helm.
Um, so I know a few trailers that were kind of big came out within the last few days, and we will cover those next week.
Yeah, Beetlejuice 2, Monkey Man. I know there was a third one, although I can't think of it off the top of my head.
I sent it. Hold on.
I am interested in Beetlejuice 2 because I really do like Jenna Ortega, and I think she's the perfect casting as the daughter of Delia Deetz. So
The official trailer for the Penguin HBO show.
right,
Monkey. Uh, okay. Monkey Man, Dragon Turtle. It is a action movie made by Dev Patel. I'm probably fucking up that name. He was the actor who played Sir Gawain in The Green Knight. He's directing it, he is starring in it, and he actually is doing a lot of the own stunts. Some people have called it the Indian John Wick.
Which I don't hate that pitch, especially not starring Gwaine. So
to be fair, Green Knight was a really good movie.
it was, yeah. Green Knight's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah, but I like that it's I really appreciate. Yeah, so the guy's doing his own stunts because he apparently has a black belt in some form of martial art. I can't remember what it was. So I've heard good things about it. It looked good. Again, we'll talk about that next week. And the Monkey Man is reference to the Indian mythology that has a Hanuman, which is like it's kind of their interpretation of the Monkey King, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
in some form. Yeah,
Kind of.
India, giant troll. And to be fair, if it was actually made in like the Bollywood sense, that movie, I mean, I think it's somewhat Bollywood coming to Hollywood in a way.
It'll be interesting to see what it's like, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Anyway, I am hungry and need food, so we should wrap this up.
Yeah. So with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Shalom and fuck off.